G'day. This video follows on from my last one when we looked at the Southland Hospital Board and studied hospitalisation rates. A problem with that data was that the young people rates looked very strong for the vaccination program, that is, and I couldn't quite work out why that was the case. Now, since then, we have come across yet another Official Information Act data sheet as shown here on the screen, and that shows quite different data to the Southland data. I don't know why. In fact, I'm not even sure where this data comes from, whether it's Auckland Hospital or Wellington Hospital or the whole of New Zealand. But it relates to New Zealand hospitals, and I think that's enough for us to proceed with it. And as you will see soon, the data for the young people is quite different and quite dire for the vaccination program. So let's get into it and have a look and see what we've got here. So first of all, this is the letter that was sent to my contact and one of the 6 data sheets that came with it. And this is the first graph that I worked out from the data sheet. And you can see here in the blue, the total doses are quite high for hospital admissions in the hospital system here in New Zealand, somewhere in New Zealand. The purple is the boosted admissions. The green is the primary course, which I assume is double dosed. The brown is single dosed, and the red is non-dosed people. And you can see the non-dosed is very low indeed compared to the other graphs here. And again, you can see that in March there was a spike of hospital admissions in New Zealand, somewhere in New Zealand. And again in July there was another spike, and as I previously said, that correlates with quite a strong flu season that happened here in New Zealand. So moving right along, per 100,000, the total doses I've taken is 84%, and I've taken that from this graph again. This is 84% of first doses, 16% of non-doses, and I've also taken 54% for first booster. So if you go back here, the first booster is the purple graph, the total doses is the light blue graph, and the non-dosed is the red graph. And again, you can see that very similar non-vaxxed and vaxxed back there in March, whereas in July the boosted were around 90 per 100,000, whereas the non-vaxxed were less than 30 per 100,000. So 3 times the amount of boosted people in hospital than non-vaccinated people back in July last year, 2022. And again, the total vaxxed was very close to the boosted vax too. And again, it shows that going to hospital and even death, most likely, but this is hospitalisation, which is usually a step towards death, was not an advantage for being vaccinated. In fact, a distinct disadvantage. You have 3 times the chance of going to hospital if you're vaccinated than non-vaccinated back in July 2022. 3 times the chance. That's a huge disadvantage. So moving forward, what about the 0 to 9-year-old hospital admissions? Well, this graph is quite different to the last one I showed in the last video, because you can see here that the total dosed admissions were way higher than the non-dosed admissions, and this is the 0 to 9-year-olds. Again, you can see on March, for instance, there was about, 40 odd non-dosed and some 600 dosed admissions, so 9 times more vaccinated children were in hospital than non-vaccinated. Now that's got to be a concern, and this should be ringing warning bells all through Parliament's halls and Ministry of Health offices. There's got to be a reason for this. And again, looking at July here, there's about 300 all dosed people in hospital, whereas there was, well, next to none non-vaccinated people in hospital. Now, okay, so let's compare this per 100,000. Now, for the 100,000 up here, I can see I've taken the dosed as 43%. And we go forward to this graph here, I've taken the 6% off the 90% shown here as the average to get 84%. To be consistent, I've taken the 6% off the 49% down here for 5 to 11-year-olds to get 43%, and I've done similarly 6% off the 86% or thereabouts in the 12 to 17-year-olds about here to get 80%. So that's where I got my figures from to work out the times per 100,000. So going back to here, for the dosed, for the 0 to 9-year-olds, it's a 43% base I've worked it from, whereas the non-dosed is 57%, because you add them together you get 100%. And comparing the two, you can see, again, we're comparing apples with apples. In March, there was a huge number more of dosed people in hospital than non-dosed. Again, maybe 20 or 10 per 100,000 non-dosed, and maybe 250 odd dosed per 100,000. So what's that, 25 times more or something? It's a huge number more than non-dosed. Again, going into July, it's about 130 dosed, whereas there is negligible numbers of non-dosed, just a handful, maybe 5 or so. Again, at least 10 times more, probably 30 times more dosed children in hospital. Now, I don't know why these graphs are different from the previous graphs from Southland Hospital Boards, but I take this one as being the true graph. I suspect there was something not quite right with the data provided in the previous graphs. So that's 0 to 9-year-old hospital admissions. So let's move up the age group to see what happens in other age groups. 9 to 19-year-old hospital admissions per 100,000. Again, I'm going from 80% dosed, 20% dosed, working out that 80% from that previous bar graph that I showed you. And again, you can see that there were more in hospital in March, not a huge amount of more. I don't know why these are closer, but there's still worse off if you're dosed back in March. And in July, again, you're worse off if you're dosed than non-dosed. And even though the figures seem to be closer here for some reason, it's still twice as many here in July dosed in hospital than non-dosed 10 to 19-year-olds. So these are approximate percentages here. I had to approximate them because I don't have the real figures from the Ministry of Health, unfortunately. This is 20 to 29-year-olds dosed. Now I've gone back to the 16% non-dosed and 84% dosed. Again, very similar in March, and then going to July, again similar, but pulling apart. It's about 3 per 100,000 dosed and about less than 2 per 100,000. So you could say that's at least 50% more people in hospital, even in the young age of 20 to 29. Moving up to the next age group, again very similar in the March time, but again in July it changed quite strongly. You've got about four dosed people compared to about less than 2 non-dosed people. You have twice the likelihood of being in hospital if you're dosed back in July than if you were non-dosed. Going to 40 to 49-year-olds, again very similar. In this case, the dosed have overtaken the non-dosed, but again very close in March. Going to July, again at least a 50% increase in dosed hospitalisations than non-dosed. 50 to 59, again, what have we got down here? About 3.5 non-dose as opposed to about 5 dosed. So approaching 50% more dosed people in hospital in the 50 to 59 age group. The 60 to 69-year-old age group, in July, got about 9 people who are dosed as opposed to about maybe 6 to 7 who are not dosed, so at least more dosed people in hospital in the 60 to 69-year-old age group. 70 to 79-year-old, for some reason it pulls away here, I do not know why. Non-dosed are about maybe 6 to 7 per 100,000, whereas the dosed are way up in about 15 per 100,000. So at least 50% more dosed people in hospital than non-dosed. Who knows why? And back to 80 to 89-year-olds. Again, a huge difference between the dosed and non-dosed in July. Non-dosed are around maybe 6 to 7, and dosed are around 16. So again, you have twice the likelihood of being in hospital if you're dosed than non-dosed, when you're comparing apples with apples per 100,000. And then the last group is the 90 plus year hospital admissions. The numbers reduce, but again you've got about more than 6, maybe 6 to 7 dosed people in hospital when you've got about 2 non-dosed. So again, 3 times as many people in hospital who are dosed than non-dosed. And the conclusion is quite simple. If you get vaccinated for COVID, you are more likely to end up in hospital. And as my previous videos have shown, probably more likely to die as well. These vaccines are obviously dangerous, and that will get me in trouble with YouTube saying that, because they've already banned a few of my videos. In fact, my last video was just banned a couple of days ago because yes, the vaccines are dangerous, and yes, you are more likely to end up in hospital if you're vaccinated. These are the lessons from these graphs, and I think we should listen to them and take them on board and realize that they should be discontinued, and the government should follow the lead of other European countries and discontinue the COVID vaccinations, because obviously they're dangerous, and not just for the younger people but for the older people too. In fact, maybe more so for the older people. Thanks for viewing this video. Have a good day. Bye.